Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Rookie Card Collector 123 video. In today's episode, we're going to continue our look at my journey to 310 that we started 2 videos ago. Last video was part 2. The first video was a high-level overview of how I built my Baseball Hall of Fame Rookies collection from 2004 to 2014 on somewhat of a limited budget, and how diverse the collection ended up becoming by the end. So today we're going to start taking a look at a few more of the upper echelon Hall of Famers, as well as a couple of rookies that ended up being true rarities that you almost never see. So the first player we're going to look at today is Oscar Charleston. Charleston was one of the all-time Negro League greats. One of the best, if not the best, all-around ball player in Negro League history. Kind of like Black Baseball's version of Willie Mays in the major leagues. Charleston began his career in the late 19 teens, around 1916 or so, and would play all the way through the 30s. And during the 40s, he actually stayed in Negro League Baseball. He became a manager of primarily the Philadelphia Stars. In addition to his Negro League days, he also played and coached and managed winter Latin ball as well in Cuba and some other Latin American countries. So Charleston was a center fielder, top slugger, high average hitter, excellent defensive player, and stole a lot of bases, especially early in his career. So, like I said, kind of like the Negro League version of Willie Mays. So Charleston, the first card that I picked up of him, as was the case with most of my Negro League guys, Charleston was the 1974 Lachlan Old-Time Black Stars. We talked about this set in the previous video, part 2 of this series. The Lachlan set was put out by Bob Lachlan. He was an artist, so basically they're line drawings of players. There's a 36-card set put out in 1974, which is the set that the Charleston card is in. They also put out a second set in 1978, 4 years later, which was called Lachlan Long Ago Black Stars. And basically that included all the Negro League greats that were not included in the first 1974 edition. So Charleston, the first card I had for representing his rookies, I picked up around 2006. I bought a complete set of the 74 all-time Black Stars. So I had Charleston as well as all the other Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, all the other big name guys that were in that set. So fast forward a couple of years till around 2008 or so, and I had been looking for a true playing days Oscar Charleston item. Preferably a card, because he's one of the few Negro League guys that did have cards produced during his career. They were all printed in overseas in Latin America. And in Charleston's case, it was all printed in Cuba during the 1920s. So Charleston had 3 different cards. All 3 of them were relatively expensive based on the time that I was collecting these. So the Charleston cards tended to be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. He was in the Thomas Gutierrez set, the Beacon set, and the Aguilita set. All 3 of those were from Cuba, Winter League ball, and they were all 23-24. And the Aguilita set was 24-25, so that was a year later. So after searching for a couple of years for the Charleston that would fit into my budget, I was finally able to pick up a graded 1. As the case with most of my cards in the collection, lower grade condition. And I picked that up in an auction. I don't remember which auction it was. It might have been Heritage, I think, if I recall correctly. And the Charleston, I believe, cost me around $3,000. I ended up getting the Aguilitas, the 24-25, which was 1 year later than his 2 rookie cards, which again was the Tomas Gutierrez and the Beacon. Both Cuban tobacco cards as well. So I had the Charleston, and Was happy with that. And then moving forward in my collection, getting more in the 2010 range now. I'm starting to focus more and more on Negro Leaguers, and especially like I talked about in my last video, any Negro League items I could find that had multiple Hall of Famers on the same item enabled me to then sell off the existing cards I had of those players and put that money into one higher end card, more valuable card. So around 2010 or so, in a Hakes auction, I ended up picking up a 1920 Indianapolis ABC's Negro League team photo. That was the very first year of the official Negro National League, as started by Rube Foster in 1920. So the Charleston photo from 1920 predated the Aguilitas card I had by 4 years, 4 or 5 years. So I was able to pick that up. It also included Ben Taylor, who was another super tough Negro League guy to try to find any kind of career playing days items for. Taylor had no cards ever made. He was a first baseman. So I picked up the Indianapolis photo. So now I had the Taylor and I had the Charleston from there. So I sold off the Aguilitas card, picked up the team photo, and had that in my collection. Again, ongoing, going forward. Right around the same time, I became aware of a 1915 Charleston team postcard. And this was not a Negro League postcard, but this was a military World War One military type of piece. It had the 24th Infantry from the U.S. Baseball team, and Charleston was in his first. Was not a professional team, so, but the first earliest Charleston known to exist was this 1915 24th Infantry U.S. military team postcard. So I was able to track it down. The owner was not looking to sell it. It had come up for auction a couple of years earlier. I really wasn't following Negro League material that closely, and I missed that one. And probably my only chance to ever pick that one up. As far as I know, it's just a one of a kind. I don't think there's more than one out there. So I kept my 1920 Indianapolis ABC's postcard, ABC's team photo. Was a Type 1. And the ending to that story, that stayed with my collection all the way till the end when I auctioned all the pieces. But several years later, all the way out into 2021, many years later, when I finally decided to auction that Indianapolis photo and let go of it, I sold it in a Hakes auction. And somebody there, bidder in the auction, recognized the stamping on the back of the photo, which was, of course, in the auction listing. The stamping on the back of the photo was identical to many photos that were housed at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown in their library. And a number of years earlier, there was a newsworthy theft that took place. Somebody was using the facility and borrowing photos to make copies and all, and ended up stealing a bunch of the original photographs that the Hall of Fame had in their archives. And one of the stolen photos was this 1920 Indianapolis photo, which I had in my collection, and of course had no way to know that it ended up being a stolen item. When I got it, I bought it in an auction, and the same way I was selling it. And so once this was identified, of course, Hakes had to pull the item from the auction, and we had to return it to the Cooperstown Library. So they gave me a lifetime pass to the Baseball Hall of Fame in appreciation for me returning the photo. Unfortunately, it was an extremely expensive photo, and it had already been running for several days in the auction and had already reached the price that I paid for it. So obviously, it was going to make me a good amount of money, but of course, the right thing to do was to return it. So that's what we did. Either way, the photo was going to be out of my hands at that point anyway. So, but just a kind of a sad ending to the way that one ended up leaving the collection. Okay, next one we're going to look at is one of the all-time MLB greats, Ty Cobb. So Ty Cobb, the first card that I picked up, rookie card version, was a 1908 E102. When I bought it, they were listed in the catalog, and the grading companies listed them on their labels as 1908. Eventually, later on, this became identified as a 1909 issue. The E102s are one of the candy issues from the 1909 to 1911 era. And that's how it kind of ended up getting grouped into as a 1909 rather than 1908. There was only one caramel set, I believe, that was actually issued in 1908, and that was the American Caramel E91-A, which had about 6 teams, I believe, 6 team members included in there. So anyway, so the Ty Cobb I had was this E102. Later on, date would change, but for now, I had that as my rookie representation. I knew Ty Cobb was in 1907 sets, a few different ones, actually three, and they were all team issues, Detroit Tigers, not put out by the team, but they all had Detroit Tigers and his teammates, as well as Tigers team cards. So the three issues were the Deitch Company, the H.M. Taylor Company, and the Wolverine News. So all three of those put out 1907 Detroit Tigers postcards. And Cobb was in all three of those sets. A couple of sets he was in multiple times in different poses, different variations. So eventually, I was looking for any of those three because that was going to predate my card from 1908 by 1 year. Eventually, it would be really 2 years, but so finally, probably 2009 or so, a couple of years after I bought maybe 3 years after I bought the E102, I find an auction for a Wolverine News Cobb, and that one ended up actually being the rarest out of the three companies that I mentioned. And at that time, I think I ended up winning the postcard for roughly $2,000. And that one was, I believe it was a PSA 3. It was actually a pretty decent condition compared to a lot of the other items I had in the collection at that time. So I was happy with the Wolverine News Cobb and wasn't really looking to upgrade or anything beyond that because that was his earliest individual item. So fast forward, I'm looking through auction catalogs as I always did every time they came in the mail. And a year or so later, I find a 1910. No, I'm sorry. A 1906 Detroit Tigers Sporting Life postcard, which is cataloged as W601. So basically, this is a team composite postcard that had little portrait images of all the Tigers team on 2/3 of the postcard, roughly on the front, and the other third is blank. It was blank because there was space there to write a message, because the back of the postcards, going back to 1906, were not divided between message and address. There was only an address back, so any message you wrote had to either be on the front or it had to use the space of the address on the back. So anyway, this was 06. The card I had was 07, so I made this a year earlier. So I got involved in this auction bidding. I ended up winning the auction for the W601 Detroit postcard of Cobb from 1906. So I sold the Wolverine News one, and they were pretty close in price. I think the team one was slightly more. So I was thrilled to have a 1906 Ty Cobb now. And that didn't last very long, though. About less than a year later, somebody on Net54, which was again a vintage baseball card forum that I had belonged to since all the way back around 2005, somebody posted a 1905 Detroit W601, but this was not a postcard. This was one of those Sporting Life premiums. They're giant size. They're about 9 by 12. And again, it's a team composite, very similar to the format of the postcard from 06 that I had, but it's the 05 Tigers with the very earliest Ty Cobb professional baseball appearance ever. So, of course, me looking for the earliest decided I had to have that. So I reached out to the seller, and rather than me putting out a few $1,000s to buy it, and then I was going to, of course, sell my 1906, to get the funds to make that purchase. So instead of doing that, I was able to work out a deal. And I think there was a little cash involved. I forget now which one way or the other, which way it was. But I picked up the 1905 premium, and I gave them my 1906 postcard. So that became my final version for Ty Cobb. Ended up being the 1905 W601 Sporting Life Premium, the 9 by 12 piece with Ty Cobb on it. And that at the end, that was one of the very, very few items in my collection that was not graded. It was raw because there was no holder big enough for a 9 by 12 item, even in 2014 at that point. So that was my final Ty Cobb rookie. Okay, next one we're going to look at is not so much of an all-time great, but it's a true rarity and another Hall of Famer that's almost impossible to find any kind of playing days items for, maybe in the top five or so in terms of most difficult. So this one is going to be Candy Cummings. Probably not a familiar name unless you're a real diehard baseball historian. But Candy Cummings is credited in the history books as having invented the curveball. And he was a pitcher back in the 1860s and 1870s. He pitched in the National Association before the National League was established. And he pitched for a team called the Hartford Blues. And upon doing some research, I found that Cummings, the earliest card I could find that was cataloged, again, this is around 2006, 2007. I'm starting to look for the pioneers and executives for Hall of Famers. Cummings would fall into that category. He was a pioneer as having invented the curveball. So I find the earliest Cummings I could find in the standard catalog of vintage baseball cards would be a Hall of Fame postcard, the very first version that the Hall of Fame put out. So these were called Sepia Hall of Fame plaque postcards for the sepia color. And these were out from 1939 was the first year they were issued, out until 1943. So it was only a 5-year period. After that, and starting in 44, they put out another version of the plaque postcards for all the new members going forward. And those were called Albert type postcards. And those would continue on for another decade or so. Eventually, in the 50s, they would switch to an Art View postcard. Again, very similar plaque postcards put out by Cooperstown. And then eventually in the 60s, I think it's 64, they would convert to the modern current yellow Hall of Fame plaque postcards, which they have today, the modern ones. So anyway, so 39 to 43 Hall of Fame sepia postcard was the Candy Cummings earliest card. So after looking for a while, I managed to find one of those. They're very difficult to find. A lot of them, if you look at population reports, are probably either single digits or barely in the teens. So finally, after a long search, I find the Candy Cummings, so I picked that up. So now I have that one. And again, reading through auction catalogs a few years later, maybe in 2008, 2009 now, I come across an auction house selling it's an 1875. I mentioned he played for the Hartford Blues National Association. So I find an 1875 Hartford Blues CDV, which is a 19th century, stands for Carte de Vista. And those were basically like an early version of a cabinet card where you had a photograph that was mounted on a cardboard backing. These were substantially smaller than a cabinet card, though. They were basically almost close to a postcard size, so a lot smaller than a cabinet. And so they had this Hartford Blues, and on that team, and pictured in the back row, I don't have it. I don't have it anymore to pinpoint exactly where he is in the photo, but Candy Cummings is pictured on there, and it was documented in baseball history books. There's sources identifying Cummings on that team and the image and everything. So anyway, so I have a chance to win that. So I bid in the auction. I did not end up getting it. I might have been the underbidder. I really don't remember. But not too much later, I was able to identify the buyer that did win it. And later on, he was a big old judge collector, lived not too far from me. I was in New Jersey, he was in New York State. So later on, eventually, him and I were able to work out a trade. I think I had another 19th century cabinet card that had like 5 or 6 Hall of Famers, and I ended up trading that to him for the Candy Cummings CDV. So I ended up picking up the Cummings. And of course, to the end of the collection, that was the only Candy Cummings I ever had from that point forward. There was nothing earlier than that 1875 Cummings. So that was not a superstar, but a really tough card to come by. So we covered a few more today. I'm going to cut off the video at this point. We're already just over 20 minutes. We'll continue again on another video. I'm going to go back to my regular series of Negro League videos, true rookie card videos, minor leagues, and all, and get back to a part 4 for my road to 310 shortly. So I hope you enjoyed today's video again. Have a great day, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.